All right, outstanding. And we do apologize for the late start, just working through some technical glitches here on our end. I appreciate everyone's patience. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn here at the Truck Safety Coalition. We are joined by an excellent guest, very much an expert on the topic of underride safety and underride guards. I'll hold off on saying more as our board member with the Truck Safety Coalition, Ms. Jennifer Tierney, is going to introduce him. But I should say that Jennifer also has a very intimate experience with this issue, which she'll share more about. And our hope is that in sharing, we can really help folks understand why this issue is so deeply personal to us, why we're so passionate about it, and why we're so animated to see change happen. There are several folks out there looking to make that change happen. We're proud to be a part of this community. And, you know, I'll just say these are very horrific crashes that are also highly preventable. We know what the solutions are, and that's what we're going to dig into today. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you, Zach. I want to welcome everybody as well today. I know that many of you have are unfortunately very familiar with underride crashes, and some of you may not be, but they are horrific crashes. And my family experienced this in 1983 when my dad was killed in a side underride crash. His truck went all the way under the side of a truck, came out 41 feet on the other side. The driver was in a jackknife position in a curve at night with no lights operating on the trailer as well. These crashes, as Zach stated, are horrific crashes because a lot of the things that we have in our cars now that would protect us, they don't work well because the car goes under the side or the rear or the front of the trailer. And it's been a complicated issue, but it's one that our government is very much aware of. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is aware of, and they have led the charge in trying to develop and to find out what we can do to stop these crashes. And they're horrific crashes. The injuries are horrific, and they're grossly underreported because there's no national database that encompasses all these crashes. The states, many of the states, North Carolina does not even have a block to check when there is a crash that it was an underride crash. But we are so very fortunate to have one of the absolute leading experts on large truck safety underride issues with us today. And we are very grateful to have him here. Matt Brumbelow has been with IIHS for many years. He has contributed to the development of many things that make us safer in our everyday routes that we take in our cars. And also they have done so much to come up with technology that would prevent underride. And these crashes can be preventable. And this organization, IIHS, has done more than anybody, from my opinion, to try to resolve this issue. So we're very happy to have Matt here, and I think that he'll be able to answer a lot of questions for us. I originally came in contact with IIHS back many years ago in the 80s, late 80s, with Dr. Patricia Waller, and she's the one that sent me to IIHS. She was with the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Research Center, and it was probably the greatest tip I ever got on how to determine how we can stop or at least slow down the deaths that are caused by underride. So at this time, Matt, we'll turn it over to you, and you're the expert.
Awesome, man. Well, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your background, how is it that someone becomes a leading expert in an issue? Well, yes, many in our community are familiar with it, who have been directly impacted, but to many out in the country, totally unfamiliar with the term underride or underride crash. So how did you come to be in this position?
So I am a research engineer at IIHS, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly what we do as an organization. But most of my research has been focused on how crash test programs and ratings that we're known for passenger vehicles here connect to real world crash situations, and what we can be doing to better use our resources to improve safety generally. And so personally, my involvement with underride began around 2008, 2009, when we did a study where we were looking at vehicles, so passenger vehicles that perform well in our front crash test program. So they're, at that time, cutting edge, have all the right safety technology, they're getting top marks, but how are people in those vehicles still being killed or seriously injured in real world crashes? And truck underride came up as one of the big categories where, as Jennifer already said, all of that safety technology is almost completely meaningless in an underride crash. So it really started from that and then has built on how do we improve the outcomes in this type of crash?
Thank you. And for just a sense of clarity for folks who might not be familiar with what we're talking about, we kind of use that term underride to basically say the passenger vehicle is going under the tractor trailer or the semi. So either from the rear, the side, the front. And so as such, a lot of that safety features, the way it's engineered, doesn't get to be activated. And, you have these really, really terrible crashes that have an infinitesimally small chance of survival. While they do occur, very, 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 very low chance. You mentioned IIHS, Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. That's your employer. Again, another organization folks might not be the most familiar with. They might know about, some of the ratings, but if you could, again, just briefly share, what does this organization do and how did they, and you mentioned 2009, was that the initial time that this issue kind of came to their attention, or is this something you've all been tracking for a lot longer?
Sure, yeah. So the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety began in 1959 when at that time 3 auto insurance companies got together and just started initially looking to support other safety research that was going on. But within a few years, a lot of other insurance groups signed on and they started building their own research team, their own staff, to be independent, so independent of the government, independent of automakers, to do research on really how do we reduce the loss of life on our nation's roads. And so the kind of early research into underride actually started in 1977. And so back then, this is pre NHTSA's regulation. This was the FMCSA, which had an underride guard rule, but there were no strength requirements to it. So it's purely geometry. You need to have something in the space. And the Institute researchers at that time did some crash tests and showed how that rule is completely inadequate. And then they actually designed their own guard, and they showed that with minimal weight increase, you could have a much better outcome. So since then, there's been a lot of regulations, different agencies getting involved, and our work has really built on it from that time.
That's outstanding. And I just think it's important to reinforce, and this actually showed up in an appropriations report of all places, but 50 years that the federal government has been aware of and the need to do something in this space. And I think, and it might have been earlier than this, Jennifer, you shared a little bit in your introduction around kind of lack of data collection. I saw one of these, I don't want to say cute, but like when back in the day when newsletters were mailed out, and it all seems quite quaint these days, but I saw an old IIHS kind of newsletter that was pointing out to the government that there really isn't any data collection on this as far back as 1992, and the need for that to happen. Have you run across any of those old kind of periodicals or items in the archives as you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have a lot of that we've tracked through the years, and some of it is gratifying to see that changes have happened, but then when you think about how long it has taken, that initial FMCSA rule, I think, was from 1953, and so it has been a long time to get where we are, and definitely not where we want to be at this point.
All right, now we were actually having plans to have Matt with us before kind of some big news happened in this space that we're going to come to here momentarily. But before we do that, IIHS has really led the way in promoting what right looks like when it comes to, I mean, a number of issues, but just keeping it to this one, what a strong rear guard should look like. And I don't just mean appearance, I mean strength requirements, its ability to withstand impact. Could you tell us a bit about that process and kind of the level of adoption, voluntary, it's not required that folks use these, but what was the reaction, and has there been an uptick, I should say, in industry utilizing this product that you all say, hey, this is what right looks like to save lives?
Yeah, so we didn't know that's where we were going when we started. Really, it did begin with this 2009 study that showed that underride is a big problem. And so that's where we started looking into the details of the regulation. So the NHTSA rule from 1998, and really trying to understand, how these guards could be failing. And to be honest, my initial assessment was completely wrong. So when I looked at the real world cases and saw, we were looking at pictures, as Jennifer and both of you have said, just horrific outcomes. My initial assumption was, these are all super high speed crashes, and these guards are failing because they're just overloaded, with the energy of a vehicle impacting them at, highway speed. But we decided to do a few crash tests to basically prove that out, whether that was right or wrong, and it was completely wrong. So we did tests at 35 miles an hour with guards that were all compliant with the NHTSA regulation, and some of them were failing, in a center impact. So this is like the easiest test that they should have. So the stationary trailer in our crash hall, we took a mid-size sedan, so not an extreme heavy vehicle, impacted the center of the trailer at 35, and some of the guards were failing. And so, but some weren't. And so seeing this range of performance, our first response was actually to petition NHTSA that the regulation needs to be changed. And so we petitioned them in 2011 to upgrade the safety standards for underride guards. But knowing how long it can take for any regulation to change, we kind of started brainstorming just on our end of what could we do to try and move the ball forward while we wait on better regulation, if that ever comes. And as Zach said, many of you might be familiar with the crash test ratings we have for passenger vehicles. And so we're used to doing consumer information tests, testing a bunch of vehicles and rating them and showing which ones are best. And so we thought, would that model work for underride guards? And we had no idea, because, completely different market. Who, the people buying trailers, are they going to care if, their guard performed well in the crash test or not? But we started testing the 8 largest trailer manufacturers of dry van type trailers. And so all these tests were 35 miles an hour, all with the mid-sized sedan. But then we did a center impact, a 50% overlap. So we're only half of the cars hitting the trailer, and then an even smaller overlap of 30%. And in those initial 8, manufacturers, only one prevented underride in all of the 3 tests. So that was both, discouraging, but also, as we talked to trailer manufacturers, realized they were actually really interested. And by and large, we had very little resistance. Some of them even thanked us for doing these tests, because they said, we don't have the resources to do crash tests. This isn't, Toyota or a GM that has a test lab. So thanks for doing this. We want to see how our design does, and we want to improve them. And they have. So we now have all 8 pass all 3 tests. And in addition, a 9th manufacturer voluntarily said, will you test our product? We want to see how it does. And so we came out with this award we call the Tough Guard for trailers that do well in all 3 tests. And so now all of these 9 manufacturers have, at least as an option, not always standard, but at least as an option, you can get a Tough Guard, Underride Guard on those trailers.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And do you have a sense of kind of the market penetration of Tough Guard guards?
We have an estimate based on sales of those companies. About 80% of dry van type trailers, which are the most common trailer you'd see on the road, on the interstates especially, have those as standard equipment for new trailers in 2021. So there are a few more that are optional, as I said, so the actual percentage could be a little higher. But then you have to keep in mind that the average trailer on the road is probably 10 years old or older. So but for the new trailers, we're seeing 80% or better,
which is phenomenal. And I do think it indicates there's a market appetite for this. And to your point, there's a lot of so-called legacy, if you will, not new trucks that would have this Tough Guard rear underride. But it certainly indicates, at least to me, that industry is not necessarily terribly opposed to this kind of strength of a rear underride and the increased weight that may present. So that does bring me to this next topic, which is again very relevant. In the past month, I think it might be a little over a month, NHTSA released its final rule on kind of the revision and the new performance requirement for what a rear underride guard has to meet. Part of that was laid out in the new infrastructure bill, known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, where it kind of laid out what this needs to do, 50% requirement, the 30% requirement, all these items Matt was sharing with us. And interestingly enough, and I think at least it was a surprise to me, NHTSA ended up in their analysis dropping that 30% overlap requirement, which was strongly requested in the bill language. It kind of fell short of a mandate. There was an out, that was kind of embedded in there. But this was just tremendously disappointing. And I should share that in their cost benefit analysis, the extra 77 pounds that would be required to meet the needs of a 30% overlap requirement, the math didn't compute. And not enough lives would be saved. And I should additionally point out that this is not really based on data that's been collected from real world crashes, despite the fact that this has been known to be a need for quite some time. And the Government Accountability Office even has requested NHTSA to collect that data, or strongly incentivize states to submit that data, maybe is the more accurate way to say it. So it's just profoundly difficult to hear that news. And interestingly enough, that 77 pounds, and you can't make this up, this is from the CDC, that is the lowest kind of average weight, the left end of a bell curve of a 13-year-old male or female child. So that's the age that legally those kids are allowed to be in the front seat. And their weight is not seen as worth the cost benefit based on the limited data that was available to NHTSA. And so I want to just kind of pause and let that sit for a moment. Jennifer, as someone who has been working this issue for as long as you have, can you put words to what that felt like to hear after, it seemed like it was secured in the bill language, it was bipartisan, people wanted this, and then to see it drop away, what What was that for you?
I think that if you go back over the years since 1950, and when you go back to when, you know, a very famous actress, James Mansfield, was killed, and her children were involved in that crash, and there were others that were killed in that crash. And you just keep seeing one right after another obvious attempt to make it better, but it didn't make it better. And the fact that it's taken so long to gather the data so that we know exactly what's going on, to me, it just shows a lack of not caring enough. And for those of us that have lost loved ones in these incredibly violent crashes, it's a horrible, violent way to die. It is very, very infuriating, and it's heartbreaking, because every time they do something like that, they're picking who lives and who dies. I mean, first of all, hope you have one of those trucks that has a good guard on there. Second of all, 30% overlap, you're just screwed, you're out of luck. And I think those of us that have been affected by Underride, and those of us that have been affected by any kind of crash with a large truck, we've got to put the pressure on them to get them to do what they need to do. For me, it is not ever letting my dad's death be in vain. This is the one thing that I can do to push back. And it looks like it's probably going to take my entire life to get it done. But if I leave this world knowing that IIHS, the Truck Safety Coalition, all of our volunteers, that we made a difference, then all of this work will have been worth it. But I think the people in government, they're just thinking, like we all do, that this tragedy will never happen to me. But do you think my family ever thought it would happen? My dad had never been in a crash. He'd never even had a speeding ticket. He was 55 years old, and he was only going 45 miles an hour when this crash happened. And so I think there's just it makes no sense to me, especially since, as Matt has already stated, that we had a lot of trailer manufacturers that were on board with this. So one of the reasons that we're doing this call is to, it's a call to people to step up and help us, not only with this issue, but with all the issues involving truck safety. But why would you ever put something in place that is not a complete fix? It's halfway doing their job. And that's exactly what they did. Yeah, we're going to do this, but we're not going to fix that, even though there is a fix. And it's an easy fix, and it's not an overly expensive fix. They refuse to do that. And I hope that everybody watching this is absolutely as upset as what I am and my family are about these crashes. When you go down the interstate next time, you look over beside you when that truck is beside you, and you just imagine going under the side of it, or if you're in back of it, going under the rear of it, or if you're in front of it and it runs over you. It could make the difference, not only in just life and death, but it can make the difference in extremely horrible, lifelong injuries that people never recover from. You have to think too of brain injuries. There's nothing between your head and the side of that truck but a piece of glass called a windshield. And they chose to not do all they could do to stop it. And they also knew that we've been trying to find an answer with this since 1950. And they also knew the number of people that were dying is underreported. I think it's just absolutely disgusting.
Well said. Couldn't say it better. I want to hear Matt's reaction as well. IIHS actually issued a statement, and again, known for their independence. I don't think make a habit of making statements to the strength that they did, and I'll defer to you to touch on that here in a moment. But just want to add some context to what Jennifer shared. Just this past year, was the rear underride even mandated to be part of an inspection for trailers when they go through an inspection? So when we talk about this length of time, and just really want to paint this picture that there's been a lot of words spoken for many years on this issue, but very little action. And also you mentioned the cost. If I recall right from that regulatory evaluation, the average cost to perhaps retrofit, if needed, to this tough guard standard was $500, between $100 and $1,000 on average. And then 77 pounds, again, another comp for it is that's less than the weight of a tire on a semi truck, less than a tire. So Matthew, what was your all reaction when you saw this? And let me add, are you additionally concerned that now that the standard is so low, you'll see a decreased demand for the Tough Guard? I know you don't sell them, but for Tough Guard rated products, or because we're reaching this 80%, if you will, threshold on new tractor trailers, that not concerned?
Yeah, those are good questions. I mean, we were very disappointed, I would say. Unfortunately, not extremely surprised. So we'd had some indications this was coming. This isn't organizational level, but my personal take on it is that the rule was already written, that it wasn't, nothing changed based on the infrastructure bill. And so that definitely is disappointing, especially when, our petition was 11 years old already. So I think there's so many problems with the cost benefit analysis. I mean, all three of us, and probably almost everyone watching, would question whether that's the right way to even go about things, to do a cost benefit on lives. However, it is what NHTSA is forced to do, but they didn't do it well. And so there's so many examples of this when you read through their analysis. One of them is just the 77 pounds. That came after intentionally throwing out guard designs where the Stoughton trailer manufacturers, an example, Stoughton claims that they were able to put a Tough Guard on their trailers, redesign the Underride Guard at no weight penalty. And NHTSA said, we don't believe that's possible, so we're not going to include theirs. Stuff like that, that's just makes you really frustrated that, it's easy to get frustrated the process that we have to do this cost benefit thing. But if you're going to do it, at least do it well. And that's what's not happening. And so, that's, I think, the really hard part is looking at all of those numbers and how they just don't make any sense.
Do we know, and I don't think we do, but do we know if Stone was asked to provide kind of all the detail that
it doesn't sound like it if you read the final rule. It sounds like someone looked at the website, Stoughton's website, saw their claim and said, no, we don't think that's possible. We're not going to include this one. It doesn't mention that they engaged with them at all about that.
Well, that's a compelling point. I mean, they do have per law the ability to reach out to those folks to try to collect that information if they so desire. There's no.
And they may have, and it may not have been included, but either way, to say, they definitely didn't get a guard and measure the weight of it, and so that's really frustrating. And so in the end, their estimate, even of their new regulation, is that it's going to save 0.6 lives per year and 3.5 serious injuries. And part of that is because 94% of the fleet is already compliant with it. But another part of it is that they've narrowed the focus so much that they've excluded almost every crash. Like, they're starting with such a small population of crashes that they think is relevant. And that applies not just to what they did do, but applies to what they didn't do. So the 30% overlap, I wrote it down, they estimated that save about one more life per year. And so that's why it's not worth it. In reality, there's no way that's the right number.
Right.
Like,
I mean, I think, not to dwell, because there's a lot of topics we want to get to in addition to this rule, but it is just, I feel like it's out of a Joseph Heller novel, right? It's out of Catch-22 that, hey, we need the data to be able to do this, all right? Make sure we need data to do this right. And so we're really limited in what we can do. Okay, well, let's get the data. Whose job is it to get the data? That's our job.
Right.
We haven't done it. Well, here we go, and that is, I don't want to throw NHTSA, if you will, unfairly under a bus. You've raised a lot of good points. I think many of those career officials trying to do good work. So I want to be clear, this is not personal in that respect, but again, deeply disappointing, and we feel there's room for improvement, and we will be filing a formal petition to reconsider that rule based on the merits of the arguments that you've shared, Matt, and others. Quickly, any concern about the market demand or no?
Initially, I don't. I mean, it was already a voluntary thing that manufacturers had done. I'd be surprised if it goes down, but when the alternative was a mandate that it would be 100%, it's definitely going to be less than that.
Right. Okay. We've spent a lot of time on rear, but there are other sides and I guess angles to a truck in which an underride crash can occur. The infrastructure bill does commit NHTSA to studying the need for side guards. What does your research say about the efficacy and possibility for side underride guards to be successful and equipped on trucks to prevent those types of crashes as well?
Right. So it's a harder thing to study because you don't have any out there on the road that you can look at, what difference they're making. But we have done a study of side underride crashes, and just based on kind of our best judgment of how those crashes turned out, we estimated about 3/4 of them would have some type of benefit from a strong underride guard. And so when the size of the problem is roughly similar. So there's about the same number of people that are killed in passenger vehicles that strike the rear as the side of a trailer each year. So the potential for a guard design, whether that's regulation or voluntary, could be huge to make a really big difference.
All right, excellent. And what has been, I guess, broadly, would you say is the reaction from carriers? We know that the actual manufacturers of rear, I think there's less probably for side in terms of quantity of manufacturers, but from a carrier perspective, is there any myths that need to be debunked, or are folks, kind of fighting against this? Because there is this push and pull of anything that adds weight to a truck is less weight for product that is being delivered. I mean, what is your sense on the need to push back against any maybe disingenuous arguments, if at all?
It gets back to the data problem. So it's hard. It's easy to make an argument, or at least say this could be a problem, but without numbers to put on the size of that problem, it's very difficult to have the conversation. But I mean, the main issues are costs, weights, and then especially for side guards, how does this affect the utility of the trailer? Are we going to get hung up on railroad crossings? You hear that all the time.
Sure.
Which is a legitimate question, but then the counter question is, how many of these dry van trailers, doing interstate road shipping are in those types of scenarios? And we don't have the answer. We need the data to know. But to all of those concerns of cost, weight, and utility, even if there are legitimate concerns there, there are solutions. There are creative ways of thinking about designing a side guard so it can deform upwards, but not sideways, something like that. Or giving a weight exemption for safety equipment. We've seen that with other types of technologies, even in the trucking industry, where certain things can not be counted towards your total weight limit. Or, the Stoughton design I already mentioned, like, can we design a smarter guard that actually isn't even that much heavier, but does a better job of protection and, different types of crashes? So I don't know all the specific answers, but to just throw up a problem and say, this is a roadblock, I think, we have smart engineers out there designing products that could address a lot of those concerns.
For sure, for sure. I was just checking the phone to see if there are any comments or questions that were shared through the comments for us. And you raise a lot of fair points. And one of the things I always react to is there seems to be this assumption, and you see it in, I think, a lot of regulatory analysis as well, that the status quo is acceptable. You know, we're starting from here. And even though we're in the midst of a 13% year over year jump, spike, surge in fatal truck crashes, the status quo is the starting point, and that's what we're starting from. And anything that has an impact to where we are now, even if where we are now is not that great of a place, is not good. Or, you know, we really have to account for example, the cost benefit analysis. I always find very troubling, and even, you know, I think you raise a fair point around exemptions to certain types of equipment on trucks for weight. In addition, though, we do know that, you know, increased size and weight leads to greater frequency and severity of crashes. And where we are right now isn't a very good place. So, you know, we also don't want to be trading safety outcomes, but it is a valid point that is not really even discussed much at all, which I think demonstrates the seriousness, if you will, of stakeholders outside of victims and other safety advocates who have a sense of urgency around solving this problem. And that's really what's missing in my view. What do you think as we look toward a path forward? We know that, you know, again, NHTSA is going to be studying the side underride issue. They're establishing an advisory committee on underride protection. And all these are good things. Don't necessarily mean that they lead to discrete outcomes that will change, if you will, the state of play. But what do we need to move the needle forward on underride safety in your view, Matt?
Well, regulation is very slow, but it has the potential to make a big difference. For that regulation to be effective, we need better data, as we've mentioned. You know, I think that needs to be a big focus of NHTSA. You know, they're using, for their cost benefit analyses, they're using data from 2009, and that data set is largely from phone interviews that happened 1 or 2 years after the crash occurred. And they're trying to get things like, how fast was the car going? How much overlap was there? Was the underride guard damaged? You know, how, and so it's completely inadequate. The best data set we found to use is the large truck crash causation study, has pictures, measurements of guards, you know, a lot of really great data, but it's now 20 years old. And so what we need is something similar, but with, you know, new vehicles, new trailers. We can see, how are these guards performing? Is it a tough guard? You know, how did it, we even can now get most vehicles have electronic data recorders in them, passenger vehicles, so we can get crash speeds without just, you know, the police estimating how fast the driver was going. We could do a much better job with the data. And then the last, you know, I was trying to think about this earlier, like in lieu of regulation or better data, like what could be done now? And I think ways of incentivizing manufacturers that have products, like if you look up patents for side underride guards, there are trailer manufacturers that have these patents. You know, Wabash has actually had a prototype side guard at a truck expo that they showed, but there's no demand for them right now. And so who are the big customers out there, like Walmart, Amazon, you know, people like that? I'm sure if they said, we'd like to equip our fleet with side underride guards, someone would sell them those trailers. And so there, I think, you know, looking at other avenues where innovation, you know, that's already taking place, but we can ask people to ask for that if they even knew that it was there in the first place.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point, and I don't recall the study now. It's one of the NHTSA studies that was done, and it kind of came to that chicken or egg question, right? Regulation or demand on the side underride issue. And, you know, if there's no requirement or even a forward-looking requirement, like we saw in the infrastructure bill for some of that drunk driving technology and passenger cars, how are we going to build the market for it in the first place? And I think what continues to amaze me, and this really, maybe it's just naivete, but in a world where ESG, environmental, social governance, and CSR, corporate social responsibility, has become so much more of a factor in how companies are viewed, as it should be. The manner in which companies get products to and from wherever they need to be continues, in my view, to be a non-factor. I could easily see a world where if people cared enough and wanted to support, companies that ship things in a societally responsible way, not only carbon footprint, but life safety on our roads, that they would be rewarded for that. And so I do think there's also an element of kind of public awareness and demand, if you want, not demand, kind of energy around seeing these things so that their family is safe as they travel this, summer vacation or whatever the case may be. To see, we have another victim board member as part of our organization who lost her father driving up to see them for Christmas. I don't believe that was an Underride crash, but the point remains, we should care more about this and not having the most rolled back price at Walmart as possible, because we're foisting that cost on victims. At the end of the day, someone always pays, and right now it's people, and I don't think that's the best way to do it. Jennifer, we're coming up here on time. I know we had a little bit of a late start, but I'm curious, did you have while we have Matt, like, it's such a rare opportunity to have him with us, is there anything you wanted to ask or share with him?
I do want to thank you for being here today, for one thing, and for all that you all have done. And I know that you will continue to do so. And I hope that you reach out to us if and when there's any reason that we can be a part of that. And I do want to encourage people as well that are watching this, when they're making these decisions, and Zach just touched on this, you're just kind of saying to yourself, well, this isn't me, this is them. This won't happen to me. How do you know it won't happen to you? Everybody the Truck Safety Coalition is made up of victims and survivors of large truck crashes from all over this country. There's nobody that's going to say, oh, we were expecting this. And I think a lot of times people think you may be in a car crash, but you just don't ever think of that. And so I think that what we need is for the people that are involved, or the people that care, that use our highways, even if you've been blessed and nobody has been injured or died in a truck crash, we all need to care, and we all need to let our representatives in Washington know that we expect better of them on this. To say that it saves one life, what if that one life is your wife, your husband, your child, your parent? And I just can't express enough how we need, in addition, Matt, to needing everything that you all do, and we're so gracious and appreciative of that, we need victims and survivors and people that just care about highway safety to step up. There's a lot of things going on in Washington right now, but this one's important, and you never know when that door knock comes and there's a cop standing there telling you that this has happened. And so I think the main thing I'd like to get across is that we all just need to become involved and demand more from our congressmen and agencies that that make these decisions for us, because some of these decisions are totally irrational. And for them to take this so long, so many years, I mean, if they had even partially addressed this issue, think of the people that could have been saved, and then the people that could have survived, that could have not had horrific injuries.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, if you joined us late, there's no way it's just one person, due to the state of data collection on this issue. But also, to build on Jennifer's point, look for local, it could be municipal, county, state level initiatives. You do see these happen, and just today, actually, there's in New York City, an amendment to the city code to require dump trucks to have side underride guards, to be equipped with those. So, you know, this is not just a federal issue. I mean, yes, the feds govern kind of interstate commerce, and there are a lot of volume, a lot of traffic on those roads, and we want to see change there as well. But if you care about this issue, there are definitely opportunities at a local and state level. So keep your eyes open. And of course, follow the work of IIHS, the Truck Safety Coalition. You know, donate to these organizations. We are really doing all we can to save lives, and it could be yours. Matt, as we come to a close, I want to give you the floor. What, how would you want to close us out here today?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to share, and I know a lot of the people watching have. This is, as you've been saying, it's a very personal issue for you, and so I would encourage you to follow Jennifer's advice and, you know, let your voice be heard, and then just to think, as we've talked about a lot of different ideas today, just to keep thinking creatively, like how can we solve this problem together? If we're all off on our own little islands, you know, the voice is less likely to be heard than when we are able to, you know, get together and share those ideas with each other like this today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Zach,
Yeah, go ahead.
before we close, I just want to encourage everybody to please, our loved ones are voiceless now, many of them. These are horrific crashes, and people usually die in these crashes, and they're voiceless. But we can be a voice for the voiceless.
That's right. One of the things that we do see introduced pretty much every year now for a number of years is something called the Stop Underrides Act. There are some champions both in the House and in the Senate who routinely introduce this legislation. I want to make sure folks on the call are aware of it, and would, you know, if you feel so led, we would ask that you ask your elected officials to co-sponsor that legislation. We know it can save lives, so please go ahead and take that action as well. With that, we're coming up here on 1:30. Can't thank Matt enough for his time. Such a remarkable body of work. Continue the great work you're doing and the entire work of IIHS. We couldn't be more appreciative, and we'll be in touch soon to communicate our next Lunch and Learn. So be on the lookout for that, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, guys.
Remember to donate to the Truck Safety Coalition. We're made up of volunteers with the exception of incredibly small staff. So if you want to see this work continue, please think of us when you are feeling generous.
Okay, well said. Take
Thank
care.
you.